Hey guys, Eric here, Accurate Appraisal Partners. Going to do a quick video about zoning today and why it's important. So everybody knows what zoning is on a property, but there's differences in zoning, and a lot of times there's not a lot of clarity, and then that'll get you in trouble. So if you have a residential property and you go to the assessors and you ask what is the zoning, the assessors are going to say, well, it's residential. Well, that's assessors in the state of Colorado. Every state might be different, but in the state of Colorado, assessors base the zoning on the use. I mean, I can cite my own properties as examples. I have raw land that's zoned ag, but it's taxed as vacant land for luxury purposes. I have a mixed use property that is zoned commercial business, but my house on the mixed use property is zoned residential, and then my business is zoned office retail, basically. So what that means is you've got to look at the actual zoning of your property. What is the underlying zoning of the ground where you're located? This has a big effect on how your property will be affected by a mortgage, or when you sell it, or if something were to ever happen to it. Example is, I called the assessors the other day. Had this happen twice in the same county. The first time I called, the land use. I called land use and I said, okay, what's the zoning of property XXX? And then this younger lady that is probably new, she said, well, you got to go to the assessor's website and it'll tell you the zoning. And I said, no, the assessors will tell me the use, but you need to tell me the zoning. And we fought, and finally I had to use an extraordinary assumption in the appraisal, because I knew the zoning isn't right, but I had to use that based on the fact that I couldn't get the proper answer from the proper people. The zoning was probably ag or rural or something to that matter, but residential is what she swore it was, because that's what the assessor said it was. Well, again, it doesn't work that way. The assessors zone or say the zoning based on the use. Had another time I called, I think it was even the same lady. This time I think she was a little more educated. I said, well, what's the zoning of this property? She said, well, it's residential. I said, well, is it rural residential? Is it R1, residential low, residential medium? Is it a state residential? And she got kind of flustered, and I said, please look it up. She looked it up, she came back, she said, well, it's a state residential. Well, in this county, a state residential means you can have anything residential, you can have outbuildings, but you can't have ADUs or Airbnbs or ADUs or additional, dwelling units. So anyway, that's a big effect. So if all of a sudden you have a home and then you build an apartment over the garage in a state residential, well, then that means you're out of zoning compliance, and usually counties won't mess with you, but if you go try to get financing and somebody discovers that, well, then your house is non-conforming illegal use. So then you're gonna have a tough time getting financing or selling your home. Or if your home were to burn down, you might not have the ability to rebuild it exactly as it was. Another reason zoning is important, I did a property over in Trinidad that's zoned neighborhood services, and I got in a little argument with the bank over this. They said, well, neighborhood services means retail, and I said, no, actually it's not retail. It means you can have a doctor's office, a law office, a restaurant, and residential. So the home in neighborhood services was a legal conforming use in zoning. It wasn't non-conforming, it wasn't grandfathered. Neighborhood services was residential, and neighborhood services is the zoning. Sorry, I get tongue-tied on these. It's easier to think about it than say it. So anyway, that house was of legal use. Another reason you got to check on zoning, Trinidad has this where you have to have a lot over 6,000 square feet, I believe, or maybe it's 6,500 square feet to build a house. Well, back in the day, a lot of them didn't care. So I've done houses that are on 4,000 square foot lots. So then you have to get a conditional use or a variance, or if anything were to happen to the house, you can only rebuild back on the foundation. So zoning gets really complex, but it's something very important to study or to understand if you're trying to buy or build a property, or look at some land to buy or build. You got to make sure that what you're buying will conform to what you want. This can be applicable to commercial, agricultural. I specialize in residential. But zoning is very important. If you have the wrong zoning, it's going to be hard to finance, it's going to be hard to sell, and heaven forbid if something bad happens to it, you might not be able to rebuild what you have. So be sure and go to land use or building departments and go ask to see the actual zoning. If they give you a hard time, You kind of got to get firm about it, but just say, look, I need the zoning. I don't care what the assessors tax it as. I need to know the zoning of the ground that the property is going to sit on or I'm going to purchase. Anyway, I hope this helps. Thanks. This is Eric, Accurate Appraisal Partners.